Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Assalamu alaikum, with greetings of peace to all of you. On behalf of the Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California, I welcome you all to today's program. Today's debate is the first of the quarterly debates on the general topic of belief and unbelief in a post-secular era. These debates and discussions aim to broaden and deepen our understanding of religion and religious beliefs, and introduce various Muslim and non-Muslim intellectuals and academicians who work on these issues to the public. We are very excited to have two great academicians, Dr. Jremi Sheamur and Dr. Ali Paya, for today's debate, and have Dr. Yasser Mirdamadi as the moderator. I thank all those who work hard to bring this debate in fruition. Also, we welcome your input and suggestions on future debate topics and other matters. Please use the Zoom chat feature to send us your comments or email us anytime at info@iccnc.org. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience that caused you because of the start time confusion between Pacific Standard Time in the United States and also the UK summertime and GMT time. So it's a learning. This is our first program, so we are learning. Now I turn over the program to the event's moderator, Dr. Mirdamadi. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started, shall we? In the name of God, my name is Yasser Mirdamadi, and it's my honor to moderate this debate tonight. As Mr. Sheikh al-Islami explained, this debate is the first session of the first debate cycle held by the Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California, ICCNC. The main theme of the 2022 debate cycle is belief and unbelief in a post-secular era. This session's topic, which is put in a question 4, is it better for a critical rationalist to be non-religious? To which Professor Jremi Sheamur answers no, meaning it is better for a critical rationalist to be non-religious, while Professor Ali Paya answers yes, meaning it is not better for a critical rationalist to be non-religious. What critical rationalism as a technical term means and how it is different from other conceptions of rationality will be explained as agreed between the debaters by Professor Sheamur in his opening statement. I'll introduce guest speakers shortly, but let me briefly explain the debate format. The debaters present their separate opening remarks one at a time. Remarks should take no more than 20 minutes for each side. Then each debater has 10 minutes to respond to the other side directly. Debaters cannot speak or interfere during the other side's opening remark or rejoinder. Following opening remarks and rejoinders, we will have intra-panel discussion. Rejoinder each side will be 10 minutes. The debaters engage with one another directly during the intra-panel discussion. The discussion in the intra-panel part is guided by arguments from opening statements and rejoinders. Only in the intra-panel discussion part can each debater speak and interfere during the other side's talk and even interrupt each other. But the flow of the debate should be observed. The moderator may interfere if it feels like the debate is being hijacked by one side. Otherwise, he or she will remain silent. The intra-panel discussion will last 20 minutes. And finally, the debaters deliver separate 5 minutes closing arguments. This is the final opportunity to reiterate their points, sell their arguments, and persuade the audience. The debaters agreed that Professor Sheamur would begin the debate. Now let me introduce him. Jeremy Sheamur was educated at the Friends School, Saffron Walden, Essex, and then at the London School of Economics. He also worked for 8 years as a full-time assistant to Professor Sir Karl Popper. He taught philosophy at the University of Edinburgh, political theory at the University of Manchester, and was director of studies at the Center for Policy Studies in London. He was then a research associate professor at the Institute for Human Studies at George Mason University in Northern Virginia. He subsequently taught political theory and then philosophy at the Australian National University. Professor Sheamur has published books about Friedrich Hayek entitled Hayek and After, and Karl Popper entitled The Political Thought of Karl Popper. He also edited Popper's book called After the Open Society, and Hayek's book called Law, Legislation, and Liberty in Hayek's collected works. Professor Sheamur was also editor or joint editor of 3 other books and has published about 100 papers in journals and book chapters in philosophy, political theory, the history of economic thought, and the sociology of religion. He has now retired as an emeritus fellow of the Australian National University to Dumfries in Scotland. I've been to Edinburgh, but never to Dumfries, maybe another time, where he's currently at work on a number of academic projects. These include delivering lectures on Karl Popper and critical rationalism. Critical rationalism using Zoom. He has convened 3 Zoom-based international conferences on Popper's work. He will shortly be delivering a series of lectures on modern Western political thought via the internet to students in a university in China. He also regularly contributes pieces on a variety of topics in politics, philosophy, religious studies, and political economy, which are published in Croatian in the online journal called Idaya, if I pronounce it correctly. Now let us see how Professor Sheamur provides a negative answer to the question, is it better for critical rationalists to be non-religious? Professor Sheamur, the virtual floor is yours for 20 minutes, please.
Thank you so much to all of you for inviting me to take part. Let me start by explaining what I'll be arguing. In my view, a critical rationalist, an approach which Professor Paya and I share and which I'll shortly explain, can be perfectly reasonably religious. Professor Paya himself is himself a critical rationalist, and he's religious, and he's a perfectly reasonable man. But I'm going to argue that it is more reasonable to be non-religious. Why? Essentially because the intellectual problems facing people in the Abrahamic tradition who are religious seem to me daunting. And I will suggest that it's not reasonable to think that they can be overcome. Critical rationalism is a view which sees us as aiming at truth, but sees all our views as fallible. It downplays the role of personal feelings of certainty. They may matter to us individually, but they don't tell us what's true. Rather, we need to learn from others, from their criticisms and from tests, which both we and they agree are telling ways of evaluating our views. While getting impressive empirical confirmations of our ideas may encourage us, as we learn from the history of science, this doesn't mean that we can be sure that we've reached the truth. Critical rationalism also suggests that we should evaluate intellectual positions in the light of how they fare in debate over time. Clearly, if a particular view hasn't done too well, in a sense which I'll explain, that doesn't mean that aspects of it may not in fact be correct. And that someone who favors such a view might not find a way in which they can respond creatively to the problems that have been discovered about their viewpoints so far. But an objective evaluation of their situation might conclude that the prospects of their doing this, the prospects of them being able to respond creatively to these problems are pretty daunting. And that it is in this sense that a proponent taking up this heroic task might be judged unreasonable. One might perhaps suggest that there's a parallel here to my saying that for my 75th birthday, I wish to climb Mount Everest. There are obvious problems about this. I am not a mountaineer. I am fat, I'm unfit, and I could continue. It's not impossible that I could climb Mount Everest, but it seems unreasonable to think that I would be successful. To climb it on my 75th birthday isn't a reasonable aim. As I've indicated, a critical rationalist approach, in my view, involves an attempt to sum up and to get agreement about what the character of the debate about issues has amounted to up to the present point. This isn't something that any one scholar can expect to achieve in any field, let alone someone who, as I do here, attempts to address the Abrahamic tradition as a whole. I'm acutely aware that I'm not a specialist in any of the traditions involved. And as a non-Muslim talking before what may well be a predominantly Muslim audience, I may make terrible mistakes. May I also apologize for any disrespect that I might show in the course of this debate, which is certainly not intended as such. I'm all too aware of my fallibility, but I believe that the path to truth lies through advancing views which we think may be correct and then getting criticism from other people. Above all, the critical rationalist aims at truth. He or she thinks that their attempts to reach it are fallible and that we depend crucially on learning from critical input from other people. I thus hope that my errors not only may be corrected, but also if there are terrible mistakes or there's inadvertently disrespect, that I may be forgiven. The best that we can hope for is that our empirical claims can withstand criticism and testing so far, and that our non-empirical claims, metaphysical or religious claims, are opened up to criticism by way of indicating clearly what problems they're attempting to resolve, and that they've also withstood criticism so far. In each case, it's crucial to pay attention to how the debate has gone, so that we don't respond to difficulties by way of unacknowledged intellectual retreat. Outside of mathematics and logic, it seems to me simply a mistake to think that we should be after proofs, and even in these technical areas, what are offered as proofs are fallible. Rather, our aim should be to try to argue that the ideas which we're advancing are cogent, are to be preferred to alternatives, and have so far been able to withstand serious criticism. Now, what about problems? I will speak only about 6 out of many possible issues. Thus, I'll turn to the substance of our debate. I will raise some problems for the theist in the Abrahamic tradition. And once again, I apologize for the fact that a debate format could mean that I am inadvertently behaving in a way that seems disrespectful. My first problem concerns the relationship between God and what is good. We all tend to think that there's more to what is good and bad than just our personal tastes, or what our particular society happens to favor, or behavior which happens to have been to the advantage of our species in its development. But there is, I think, a problem facing all of us as to how the gravity and significance that we wish to give to ethics fits into our understanding of what we know about the world. A theistic view might indeed offer some reassurance that objective values are real, that they are, as it were, part of the fabric of the universe. However, such views typically don't tell us how it is that values fit into the world. That's to say that theism, it seems to me, while affirming the importance of objective values, doesn't help with this problem of what the place is of values in the world as we're discovering it to be, a problem that faces all moral objectivists. And I think the theistic view faces some problems of its own. For example, just what is the relationship between God and what is good? The issue here is, how do you steer a course between making God in some sense subservient to objectively existing values, or making values simply what God has decided, a bit in the way that an arbitrary ruler might decide what the content of the law is? Second, there is the problem of the goodness of God. We take God in the Abrahamic tradition to be all-powerful, to possess complete knowledge, and also to be good. There is a huge literature on how this relates to the problem of human and other suffering. Clearly, if the world is given a particular character and people can act freely within it, this may produce difficult and painful consequences, but not ones the existence of which I think poses particular philosophical problems about evil. What seemed to me more of a problem is what one might say look more like design faults, and ones which over time humans might be able to remedy. Consider here the terrible problems of cancer and of Alzheimer's disease, which we may hope over time to address, as well as many less dramatic problems, and some of which indeed we have been able to resolve. That they can in principle be addressed indicates that things don't have to be like this. But why then, if God is both all-powerful and good, are they there? It seems to me woefully insufficient to say, well, people need something to stimulate them or problems to work on. If issues of this kind and seriousness were within the power of any good parent to address in respect of their children, they would surely do so. Not say, oh, the children might be able to deal with them when they grow up. The problem for the theist here looks to me to be that if God is both good and all-powerful, why did he leave us facing various horrors when they could, on the face of it, have been addressed without setting the fundamental order of things or undermining our autonomy? As, after all, our own limited medical discoveries make clear where we've been able to develop remedies. Now, there may, of course, be some deep reason for all of this, but as far as I can see, if this does exist, God, as is understood in the Abrahamic tradition, has not explained what it is. And this, if I can say so, would seem to me to be another fault. Next, there is the issue of homosexuality. On my understanding, this, on traditional views of the Abrahamic tradition, is condemned in dramatic terms. Some liberal Christians have tried to get round this, but those, it seems to me, with more intellectual integrity, say that people who are sexually attracted to their own sex have no option but to be celibate and to ask for support and fellowship from their co-religionists in trying to cope. The problem, as far as I can see for the theist, is that homosexual orientation seems to be either innate or to be an involuntary product of certain social circumstances. People who are homosexually oriented feel just the same way about some members of their own sex as the rest of us do towards some members of the opposite sex. One is not here dealing as one might with something that's a kind of gratuitous indulgence in something perverse, but something that plays a key role in people's orientation to others, and which could be the vehicle for deep love, affection, and the relationships that last over time in the same kind of way as do those between heterosexual couples. The British, now American writer Andrew Sullivan has offered a powerful and basically conservative argument for gay marriage, along the lines that it's better for all involved if homosexuals have the possibility of stable, loving relationships which are socially recognized and reinforced. The problem here with the Abrahamic tradition is that we're offered a picture of an all-knowing God simply condemning people for orientation which, whether genetic or a social product, seem involuntary at the level of the individual and cutting them off from some of the deepest aspects of human life. Next, I'd like to say something brief about mysticism. I think the mystical experience is real in the sense that similar phenomena have been described by many different individuals. However, the problem about those in the Abrahamic faiths invoking this in support of their religious views seems to me to be that what people experience is strongly influenced by the religious traditions in which they're operating. Followers of Mrs. Blavatsky's ideas about theosophy reported experiences of encounters with spiritual masters, whom it turns out that the founder of theosophy actually invented. Although there is a lot reported by those within the Abrahamic traditions, which seems in its character more pantheistic than should make those in those traditions, I think, feel happy. In addition, there are obviously pantheistic reports from the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, and also a lot that seems to fit pantheistic ideas from people who are completely secular, but have experimented with certain hallucinogenic drugs. All that I want to say here is that it seems to me that if someone wishes to claim mystical experience in support of their religious views, I think they need to offer us a cogent theory about the character of all this and its relation to reality, rather than just picking experiences that support their own favored views and ignoring the rest. Next, messiahs and the end of the world. I'll only say briefly that it seems to me that all speculation about messiahs and ideas about the imminent end of the world should be treated as an embarrassment and drops. We've had endless such speculations, all of which have been wrong. They've disturbed people and led them to do silly things, and in my view, have distracted them from the important task of developing institutions and ethical codes which make for good behavior in our changing concrete circumstances. Finally, there's the problem of Abrahamic theism and our developing knowledge about the world. If the world is God's product, as the Abrahamic tradition tells us, then on the face of it, our revealed knowledge of this should surely offer us a program for how the world should be understood, a key to how the world actually is. But in the Christian Middle Ages, and on my understanding in Islam, it was basically to classical Greek philosophy, Platonic, Neoplatonic, and Aristotelian, that religious people went for leads, that's to say, rather than to their own religious ideas. While subsequent to the scientific revolution, huge but fallible strides have been making use of ideas which have no obvious link with the Abrahamic tradition at all. If I'm right that these are problems that have to be taken seriously, then scholars attracted to the Abrahamic tradition might try to respond to these issues. The options are open, but two tendencies here seem to me terrible. The first is what I might call the ad hoc reinterpretation of one's tradition in the face of failure, so as to claim that things that were understood literally are in fact just to be understood as poetry or some kind of symbolism. Clearly, there is poetry and symbolism in all the Abrahamic traditions, and material may be open to many different levels of understanding. What it seems to me is problematic is to retreat from what's seen to be empirical, historical, or metaphysical claims simply in the face of the fact that one's clearly got things wrong. It puts one on a par with a fortune teller who simply dismisses all forecasts which they made which were wrong as not actually having been forecasts at all. The alternative is also to simply seek for parallels between odd aspects of contemporary science and what is to be found in the Quran or the Bible. This is typically done in an arbitrary manner. Alternatively, one might have what in principle is a serious agenda, like that of the proponents of so-called intelligent design, in taking issue with Darwinian approaches in biology. The problem here is that, in my view, these people don't take seriously what they'd actually have to accomplish to produce a genuine alternative to what they're criticizing. All told here, my argument is for intellectual adventure, that the proponents of theism should say something interesting which challenges current secular ideas if they're to expect anyone to take them seriously. Instead, my worry is that we'll get more and more of what is experienced within so-called liberal Christianity, that's to say, steady intellectual retreat from a religious approach which made serious claims to knowledge about the world, about history, about theology and ethics, to a systematic shedding of any interesting claims about anything. A retreat into moral platitudes and into the echoing of the changing secular wisdom of the day, while conservative Christians seem to me typically to fail to engage seriously with the intellectual challenges that have been offered of their views. The key issues facing the religious believer who is interested in intellectual issues look to me to be, first, to say something interesting to an increasingly secular world, to tell us what, in their view, things are like and how these claims are to be assessed. Second, to review the debates that have taken place over history, to see whether they have been in intellectual retreat. And third, to set out in the light of those debates what the problem situation is that they face and how they think it should be addressed. In my view, it is in the face of the sheer challenges of this that while their individual courage may be admirable, I think that their hope that they can meet this challenge isn't a reasonable one. I thus think that there are real problems to be addressed, as indeed there are facing non-theists who, in my view, tend also to duck the problems that they need to grapple with. And on neither side can we expect that there'll be knockdown answers. But, and this is why I take the view that I do about the motion before us, it seems to me that the problems facing the believer are particularly daunting. I can wish a believer who sets out to tackle them all the best, but the task before them looks to me so daunting that I don't think their hope of overcoming it is a reasonable one. Accordingly, while I think that a clever and very able man such as Professor Paya can be both a critical rationalist and a religious believer, I don't think it's reasonable for him to take this view, just because the problems facing him in dealing with such matters look so difficult that it's unreasonable to judge in the current circumstances that they can be overcome. His prospects look to me about on a par with my hopes of successfully climbing Mount Everest on my 75th birthday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sheamur. Almost perfect timing. Okay, now it's time to introduce the second guest speaker. Ali Paya is a professor of philosophy at the Islamic College affiliated with Middlesex University, London, and the chair of the Islamic College Research Ethics Committee. He's also an adjunct professor of philosophy at the National Research Institute for Science Policy, Iran. He completed his undergraduate and graduate studies in electronic engineering, philosophy, and philosophy of science in Sharif University, Tehran University, and University College London. He also studied Islamic philosophy with traditional masters in the field in Iran and I suppose mainly Shahid Mutahari. As a visiting professor, Paya has worked with many international universities and research centers, including the University of Westminster, Middlesex University, the Center for the Study of Muslim Civilizations, all in the United Kingdom, the University of Belgrade, and the Albach Research and Training Center in Austria. Paya has authored more than 28 books in Persian and English and has translated or edited nearly 10 titles in Persian and English. He has published more than 100 research articles in Persian, English, Arabic, and German. His most recent publications include Islam, Modernity, and a New Millennium, Themes from a Critical Rationalist Reading of Islam, 2019. Science, Society, and Development, Essays on the Public Understanding of Science, 2021. Religious Science, Indigenous Science, and Islamic Science, Thinking the Impossible or Thinking Ahead of Time, 2021. Methods, Methodologies, and Perspectives in the Humanities and Social Sciences, with particular reference to Islamic Studies, a Critical Rationalist Interpretation, forthcoming 2022, and the Quran versus the Theory of the Evolution, a critical assessment of the contrasting views of two prominent Shia scholars of 20th century, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Tabatabai and Dr. Yadullah Sahawi, forthcoming 2023. Now let us see how Professor Paya provides a positive answer to the question, is it better for a critical rationalist to be non-religious? Please.
Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me begin by again thanking you, the moderator, Dr. Mirdamadi, and the organizers of this meeting at the Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California, in particular Dr. Ali Basibi and Mr. Ali Sheikh al-Islami. My thanks also to my friend and fellow critical rationalist Professor Sheamur for participating in this debate and for his incisive arguments. I am not sure whether I will be able to match his eloquence and depth of arguments. I also like to extend my heartfelt condolences to the people of Abadan on the tragic loss of their loved ones in the collapse of the Metropole Tower, which happened almost 10 days ago. In the first part of my presentation, I would like to share the following thoughts with you. Professor Sheamur has presented some serious challenges to believers. Given the extent and depth of his arguments, the 20 minutes assigned for my opening remarks seem woefully short. In particular, one of his main challenges, namely the problem of evil, is an issue which many great thinkers have discussed for more than 2 millennia. Therefore, realistically speaking, in the course of this debate, the best I can hope for is to merely present the outline of some arguments that aim to show why the position of a critical rationalist who is a believer has an edge over the position of his non-believer colleague. I don't know what happened to my... do you still see me? Sorry.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes. We can see you and hear you, okay. Professor Paya. Yeah.
Professor Sheamur has, for obvious reason, I speak as a Muslim critical rationalist. Here the plan of my talk. First, I will say a few words about the similarities between critical rationalism and religion in general. Secondly, I try to shed some light on the argument from evil, the ontological status of values, and God's justice. Thirdly, I try to briefly explain the position of a religious critical rationalist concerning the issue of non-conventional lifestyles. And finally, If I have time, I will highlight one major conceptual difficulty which is faced by non-believers. I'll discuss some other difficulties for non-believers in the other parts of my debate. Due to time constraints, I postpone my discussions concerning the epistemic status of religious or mystical experiences and the relationship between religion and our knowledge of reality to the second part of this debate. But before beginning the main part of my opening remarks, I would like to suggest to Professor Sheamur not to lose hope with regard to his plan of climbing Mount Everest. In 2013, an 80-year-old Japanese man, Yuichiro Mio, if I pronounce his name correctly, reached the summit for the third time. I guess, therefore, there is plenty of room for being hopeful for my dear friend, Professor Sheamur. Now, the first part of my talk is critical rationalism and religion. Critical rationalism, as a distinct school of thought and a way of life, has many things in common with certain interpretations of religion. Both are against the extremist understanding of religion manifested by the likes of Daesh or supremacist Christians or militant Hindus who kill those who they regard as others. Both are anti-positivism, anti-materialism, anti-physicalism, in that they subscribe to the view that reality is far richer than what can be grasped by the testimony of our senses or empirical evidence. Both believe that there are many mysteries in reality, some of which we may never be able to comprehend or decipher. Both maintain that individuals and communities ought to be moral and uphold and observe codes of morality. Both share the view that knowledge is a pathway towards spiritual emancipation, and truth is the ultimate goal of our knowledge pursuits. Both aim at making the world a better place for all, and both argue that future is open and optimism is a moral duty. In the second part of my talk, I discussed the issue of God and the problem of evil. Professor Sheamur's argument from evil was suggested, as was suggested earlier, present a major challenge to believers. In the time left, without denying the gravity of this problem, I try to unpack some aspects of it. Let's begin by noting that evil is an absence of good. It is a privation. Like shadows, it does not have a real existence. There are two types of evil. First, natural evil, like natural disasters, such as earthquakes, eruption of volcanoes, pandemics, etc., which are regarded as evil only when looked at from a human perspective. For example, a